Hi, my name is Chris, and I get to pastor this amazing group called Destiny Church. I'm so thankful that you're joining us today, and we would love to hear your story of what God is doing in your life. You can visit us at our website at destinychurchjacksonville.com and click on our testimony link. Also, if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can also do that online. Now, get ready to prepare your hearts to receive a word from God.
Nobody does an introduction like Chris. You know, like he could have met you on the street and you're going to get an introduction just like that. And so, man, Destiny, it's an honor. I don't say that everywhere I go. Some places I go and I'm like, I'm here. Thanks for having me. But it truly is an honor to be with you guys. It's like coming to a home away from home. And I'm humbled that I get to go on sabbatical. But man, if you're like me, I'm a self-diagnosed and multiple tests online and Facebook have told me this, then they're true. So it's just basically the word of the Lord. That I am just like a workaholic, man. I enjoy work. I'm so bad at it that I've got several messages I could preach on how biblical work is, because you know once you find out you have something, you got to justify it, and if you're really a good Christian, you justify it with the word of the Lord out of context. So I've done that, and so I came in this year to our team, and they said, "Hey, you've been here 5 years." And we've been spending time with our staff, and we just made the decision last year as an executive team that we want to do ministry for a long time, and we want to do it together for a long time. And so we understand that all great relationships need a break. It's a word for marriage today. Some of y'all just need to, here's $20 for you, here's $20 for me. I don't want to know what you do with yours. I'm going with mine. I don't want to see you until that $20 is spent. And if you can stretch that out for a week, God bless you. I'll see you when the $20 is gone. But, you know, I always do this when I'm here because I have this deep value, and Chris just talked about it, but man, honor is the currency of the kingdom. And if you don't know that, what I know to be true is that you probably have an area in your life that's suffering, and the solution is honor. You know, Jesus, there's a phenomenal story where Jesus goes to a village, and it says that a prophet in his hometown is without honor. And it says that God, the Messiah, right, the third part of the Trinity could not work many miracles there. Could not. Not that he didn't want to, that he had a deep desire, he had the ability, he had the authority, but he could not because there was just a lack of honor in that city. And so I heard this quote recently. I want to pass it on to you. It says, "What you do not honor in your life, God will soon cause to exit your life." And so I just want you to know, I meet a lot of senior pastors. I do. I'm very privileged. I get to spend a lot of time with phenomenal leaders literally all over the world. And Chris and Jody, man, they are a cream of the crop. And so I just want to make sure that you understand that, because anytime that you get a chance to say thank you, to love on them, to bless them, to just give them a hug and say, hey, we're going to make it through this, it goes a long way, okay? And God will honor that and reward that, all right? So we're gonna dive into the word today, and you know, I'm on sabbatical, and so I haven't preached in a while. So like I'm gonna take the training wheels off eventually, right? But we're gonna get there. I feel like I became a full-blown Christian this week. It's been a while. You know, the first thing is you get saved. The second thing is you write your tithe check to Chick-fil-A. You know, you guys know this, right? The third thing is if you survive the Disney boycott of the 90s, you made it, okay? You're in. That's just a badge right there. You got to get a cute cross tattoo somewhere, on your vehicle, on your body, on your pet, somewhere. You got to get a cute cross tattoo. And then finally, like the Mecca, you know you've made it, is if you willingly rent a minivan when you go on vacation. Pray for me, Destiny, all right? Pray for me, all right? Been here a week. I'm driving a minivan, and I'm a diehard Fast and the Furious fan. I own them all. They're all on my phone. When people see me on a plane, and they're like, are you studying scripture? I'm like, no, man, I'm keeping up with Vin Diesel, bro. Back off. Like Dominic Toretto and I are having a moment, all right? You sit over there. I'm going to sit over here. You do you, boo-boo. I'm doing me, all right? I'm cheering for Dom and Letty, right? So there's this scene in one of the Fast and Furious, though, like in like, I think it's 6, right? And Brian is dropping little Jack off at school, right? And he is getting ready to race, and then it pans out, and he's in a minivan, and you're just like, oh, Brian, no! I was picking up the minivan the other day, and I text my wife, and I'm like, you know that scene in Fast and Furious? Like, this is my life right now. I feel for Brian. I just feel, man, like it's, so for those of you who drive minivans, I'm sorry. I'm just feel for you. I was driving down the interstate, and I'm like, I'm going to start a company of rental cars at airports for dads. And it's just like Hummers and trucks, and they all come with car seats, and they're all ergonomical, and they all get like 90 miles to the gallon, so moms are happy, and it's just for dads, all right? So I have to tell you, though, like being here, it feels like I haven't left. I was here in November, and after I left here, I discovered this really cool thing on Facebook where you can unfollow people, and they have no idea. It is the best, right? Facebook is just teaching us a whole new thing about community. So like I'm like a great millennial parent, meaning I'm in charge of putting our daughter down most nights when I'm home. And so I do what any good millennial parent does. I put her in bed and then I lay next to her under the covers on my iPhone, okay? And so I discovered that you could unfollow people after I left here. And I came out one night and I was beaming, man. And my wife's like, what's going on here? And I'm like, babe, I just unfollowed like 300 people. I was in our daughter's room under the covers going, bye, Felicia, got to go, see you later. I said, and like, I feel great. It was like spring cleaning for my soul. Like these people, I don't even see them and they suck the life out of me. This is awesome. But what happens is like, then your Facebook feed gets really like sparse. And you know who just keeps popping up? Destiny. I mean, every time I get on there, I see you guys more than our church. I finally went to our team, and I'm like, look, I love y'all. We work together, so just hear me. Like, how come I always see Destiny, and I spend like 80 hours a week at this church? Like, how does Facebook want me to be more connected to Destiny than Trinity? Like, this might be a problem, you know? But I just got to tell you, I'm so proud of you guys. Like, you guys are just building community, changing your city, the nations. And so I'm just so proud of y'all. And so, hey, if you got your Bibles, go with me to John 15. We're going to dive into the word here. And I want to share a message with you that is one of those messages that God has started in my life about 14 years ago when I was just a young, snotty-nosed kid, as Chris referred to me a minute ago. And I was in the local church, and I was wrestling with my youth pastor at the time. His name was Mick Cavanaugh. And I was having this wrestle with the local church, and I was frustrated. I had watched the church I had grown up in go through this crazy split and just totally dissolve. I watched my dad as an elder and a youth pastor just get totally run through the mud. And I was at another church in town, this small Baptist church, just trying to recover, trying not to walk away from the church. And this journey for me began in that office with Mick Cavanaugh. I'll never forget. He had me read John 15 and also the biography of YouTube, because he just thought, you know what, every great pastor needs to read these two things. And in John 15, Jesus, they call this a high priestly prayer right here in John 15 and 16 and 17. Jesus this is a moment where we have one of the longest recorded prayers of Jesus. And Jesus says in John 15, chapter 16, he says this, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit. Fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you." So Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's saying, I have this purpose for you. I was 16, and I was looking at Mick, and I was going, man, what's my purpose? I'm trying to figure this out, and I want to know what I'm called to do, and I had this weight in my heart of trying to figure out what God had called me to. And I'll never forget, Mick brought me to John 15, and he said, this is it, JD. You were created for a purpose, and the purpose is to bear fruit that lasts. And I think we get that. I think like we read that, or if you've ever heard that, you're like, yeah, I get that. I don't know how I'm going to do that as a human, but I'm in it to bear fruit, whatever that means. Like, I want to do that. And I always like to pass on like great tidbits. And so how many of you are millennials or have millennial kids? Let me see your hands. Okay. As a millennial, you don't want to raise your hand, but just for crowd participation, can you let me see. Okay, great. 5 of you. Awesome. You're all liars, okay? Because there are for sure some people under the age of 38 in this room. How many of you are under the age of 38? Raise your hand. Oh, there you are. Hi. I should have done a Facebook poll, right? All right, so millennials are 38 this year. We are crushing the world, and there's this massive change that's happening in the workplace, and And we talk about this all the time, and I think it's really important to understand that culture talks about generations by age group, but Jesus talks about generations from a Jewish perspective. And when he said generation, he meant everybody alive at the time. So that's just fun. But when we think about purpose, when we think about who we are and how we're created to be, this passage of Scripture is just near and dear. And so generations before millennials, I think this is fascinating. They put these three things in order. I think we have a slide. They put life in order like this: provision, purpose, and passion. So if you're over the age of 38, you grew up in a world where you've really made decisions, whether you know it or not, through this filter of like, how am I going to provide? And one day I will find my purpose, and one day I might get to do my passion, right? And so the whole world is shocked right now because millennials actually flip up this order, and they say, well, you know what? I first want to find my purpose, and then my passion, and then I'll worry about how to pay the bills. So if you have a millennial in your life, let me just encourage you as a millennial, right? My senior pastor all the time, he just talks about millennials, right? Like we're burning down the planet, and I constantly remind him, like, no, we didn't. Okay, anyway, whatever. But we're constantly having these conversations about generations, and I just told him, I said, like, I went to him one day early on. I think my wife and I had been at the church, I don't know, 6 months, and I was in his office for something and trying to change something too soon, or I don't know, being a millennial, and I looked at him, I said, hey, like, if we ever get to a place in our relationship where, like, this doesn't work for you, just let me know. I'll go do something else. And if you want me to stay on staff and you want me to go do something else, just let me know, and I'll do that too. And if you just want me to show up to meetings and give you all my best ideas for how to build the local church, and you still want me to go work somewhere else, just let me know. I'll go do that too. And he just looked at me like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, yeah, because when I was 16, John 15 wrecked my life. John 15, verse 16 says that I have a purpose, and my purpose is to bear fruit. And so I just want to pass this on to you. This is what we're going to talk about today and unpack. But this phrase, man, over the last decade of my life has been really fleshed out. If I could tell any young person, old person, really young person, or anywhere in between person, I would tell them this, that your purpose is to bear fruit. Do it in an area that you're passionate about, and someone will pay you to do those things if you do them with excellence. Your purpose in life, if you've said yes to Jesus, is to bear fruit. If you haven't said yes to Jesus, I want to tell you that, like, you were created as a human by God. In Genesis 1, we study scripture in the beginning of the Bible. It tells us that you were created with a purpose, and it was to work and to bear fruit and to cultivate and to create with God in relationship. And so whether you know it or not and you haven't said yes to Jesus, I'm here to tell you that your purpose is still to bear fruit. If you want help with that, if you want to know how to do that, if you want to build fruit and bear fruit that remains and fruit that has legacy and eternal impact, then you have to do it in relationship with Christ. There's no other way. And it doesn't matter who you are, or where you're at, or what you're good at or not good at, what color your skin, your hair, your language. It doesn't matter. If you've said yes to Jesus, then your purpose is to bear fruit. And if you do that in an area that you get to choose, you should do it in an area that you're passionate about. And if you find an area that you're passionate about and you begin to bear fruit and you do that with excellence, somebody will pay you for it. And so at 16, like, I started on this journey, and this morning I want to pass along some things that I find and I have found in Scripture, and really I want to pass on, like, the cliff notes to you of how to figure this out as best as you can. And so if you're taking notes, man, my message this morning is just entitled Planted. 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 John 15 tells us our purpose is to bear fruit, but man, like, if you open up Scripture and you're like, okay, if I'm going to bear fruit, what do I got to do? There's a guy who writes about this, profoundly true, and that's in Psalm chapter 92, verse 12. David is writing, and he writes this. He says, the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him. So David is writing hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus is going to step onto the scene as a human. He's writing the truth and the the process required to do the thing that Jesus is going to tell his disciples one day that they're called to do, which is bear fruit. David, hundreds of years before, is going to say, okay, if you want to bear fruit, then you and I have to be planted in the house of the Lord. And if you want to be an old person, like my dad has taught me this truth. He says, old is an attitude. Age is just a number. And I'm sure he got that off a fortune cookie that he bought with his AARP discount. But, he tells me that all the time, right? Old is an age. Old is an attitude. Age is a number, right? So if you want to be old and still bear fruit, then you got to be planted in the house of the Lord. If you want to be young and bear fruit, then you have to be planted in the house of the Lord. If you want to be middle-aged and bearing fruit, you got to be planted in the house of the Lord. And David in chapter 92, it's a fascinating scripture because in that chapter, David contrasts the wicked and the righteous, right? David so often does this in his writing, and he talks about the children of the wicked, the children of the righteous. He compares and contrasts, but in chapter 92, he compares the wicked and the righteous, and he says the wicked are like grass. They sprout up and they're gone. They have no roots, they don't bear fruit. But he says the righteous bear fruit. The righteous are like a palm tree. The righteous provide shade to others. The righteous, and it just goes down and down and down and down and down. And in order to bear fruit, then you and I have to be planted in the local church. And what I find interesting is that the bearing fruit season of a tree is really towards the end of a tree's life cycle, right? If you think about a tree's life cycle, there's a couple major monumental moments, right? Like the first, there's the seed, right? And it's planted in the right soil, and then it's watered, right? Secondly, what happens, just 7th grade biology here for you, is that seed breaks out of the shell that it's been protected in, right? In the right soil, the seed determines, hey, this is great soil. There's enough water and nutrients. Great, this is a great place to be planted. And so what happens is the plant actually has to break out of the shell to begin to put down roots, right? And when it sheds that hard shell, that's the only time that the plant actually begins to grow and to begin to put down roots so that it can eventually bear fruit, right? Can I as I was praying about this, there's somebody here who needs to hear this truth about being planted. That until you crack back that hard shell that you've created from hurts and wounds and past experiences, until you break out of that, you won't be able to be planted. And you're probably here this morning, and in some capacity, you've been from community to community to community wondering, why can't I get planted? Why can't I connect? Why can't I make friends? Why can't I learn from this pastor? Why can't I engage in worship? Why can't I find a place to belong? And I just want to tell you that some of that is due to the fact that you keep going from soil to soil to soil to soil without breaking that shell. And until you break that shell, until you're willing to be vulnerable and broken, you can't put down roots. You can't put down roots, and you can't even begin to grow and bear fruit. And so I run into people all the time who are 60, 70, 80 years old, and they're like, man, I don't have any fruit in my life to show. And when you start to talk to them, they're the most bitter and angry, resentful, disenchanted, disenfranchised people you've ever met. And it's like, I want to be gracious and tell you this, but it's you, man. You got this shell around your heart that you won't break out of to allow yourself to actually be planted. I think it's fascinating too, like we lived in Colorado for a while, and I have a friend who works for the National Forest Service, and he's a firefighter on a hotshot crew. And one time he and I were talking, and he said, JD, like everybody hates wildfires. Like, I mean, obviously, like they're extremely destructive, and we live in the middle of the national forest, and he has a very different perspective than a homeowner in a national forest. He said, the coolest thing is he said, sometimes I get to go back to areas I've been before to fight massive wildfires, to put out other ones or do cleanup or whatever. And he said, what's always fascinating to me is how quickly a forest rebounds after a wildfire. And he said, you know what that's from? I said, no, I don't know. Teach me. I'm an idiot. And he says, well, the seeds from a lot of these trees, they're wrapped up in a really hard shell, and they don't even get dispersed until after a wildfire. Until literally going through hell, some seeds can't even get planted. And so you might be here this morning going through hell. And I just want to tell you, like, Those seasons are opportunities of the Lord saying, if you'll allow me, I'll plant you in good soil. And this season may be the season that the Lord is using to break you out of the shell so that you can actually get planted, right? So somebody need to hear that this morning, right? So after that, after putting down roots, right, the tree pops through or the grass or whatever's growing, it breaks through the soil and it starts its journey upward. And the tree, if it's a fruit tree, it's doing two things. It's actually growing two ways, right? We think, oh man, trees grow up. They actually grow down before they grow up. Banning Liebscher, he has a phenomenal book if you want to kind of study some more of this called Rooted. It's really great. Love Banning, love his truths. I mean, just some simple, profound things. But he says this, in order for a plant to survive, much less bear fruit, its root system has to take up more space underground than the plant takes up above ground. So David's writing this profound truth. He's saying, hey, if you want to bear fruit in every season of your life, then you've got to be planted in the local church. You've got to be planted in the house of the Lord. And so the foundation always has to be bigger than the thing that it's supporting. The foundation always has to be bigger than the thing that it's supporting. So if you're going to be flourishing, if you're going to be somebody who's bearing fruit, if you're creating legacy, then you have to understand that while you want to grow up, while you want to be visible, while you want the things of God that he's doing in your life to be visible, like, oh God, like I finally am doing all the things that I feel like I'm supposed to do. Until you can do those things, you have to do the secret things. You have to be willing to grow in the things that aren't present. And that's the part that's really, 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 really hard. And so I want to talk about the soil that we need to be planted in this morning. There's just 4 that I want to share with you real quick, real simple. The first one is the soil of intimacy. Right? If you're going to bear fruit, if you're going to be somebody in the local church who bears fruit, you're going to be planted in the house of the Lord, there's a couple things that are going to be required. The first one is intimacy, the soil of intimacy. So David, in his journey towards being a king one day and being a giant slayer, the first place that we find David is in a field, right? And we've talked about it. We've seen the flannel graphs, if you grew up in church, of like David and the sheep and the cotton balls. Like you made that art, and your mom still has it, right? My mom still has mine, so I know she still has yours. My mom might have yours. I don't know. I've been in only portions of their garage, and I dare not go any further, right? So David, in the midst of this field, he's learning a lot of things. He's learning one of those things that is required of anybody. Not a king, not a giant slayer, just somebody who knows God, is to live a life of intimacy, to be a worshiper, to be alone in a field and to have no one but the Lord and sheep. And sheep don't talk back unless you've been out there a really long time. Then they might start talking back. You've got to learn to be a lover of Jesus if you want to bear fruit. You've got to learn to be a lover, a worshiper of Jesus if you want to bear fruit. The best fruit is the sweetest fruit. And the sweetness of our lives comes from intimacy with Jesus. So you can build a lot of things, you can do a lot of processes, but if you don't have the presence, if you don't have time with the Lord, then the fruit that you produce will be fruit. It still will be fruit, but it won't be sweet fruit. And people always choose sweet fruit over just fruit. It's like, this is fruit, but man, it's like, I'm eating this because it's like broccoli. Like, I have to. But like, this fruit is real sweet. Like, I was on a trip one time in Mexico. I was in this internship, and I spent a month in Mexico going from village to village and all over the place. And I remember like one day we were driving along this cliff, like literally like people shouldn't drive here. Like donkeys should walk up this, but people shouldn't. And I was like, where are we going? And this guy was like, I don't know, man. It just says we're supposed to go to the orange villages. And I'm like, what does that mean? And so finally we came kind of around this corner, and there was like this, literally a hut in the middle of the rainforest. And I'm like, he was like, we're here. And I'm like, we're where? He's like, the orange villages. I'm like, what does that mean? So he's like, come on, So we get out, and like you go to this hut, and we met like the mayor or chief, and he's like, oh yeah, welcome to our villages. And I'm like, there's nothing here. this is going to be a short trip, Only one guy to talk to, and he's going to get bored real quick. And he's like, no, just like walk around. Like, this is our village. And I'm like, there's nothing here. And he's like, just follow this path. And I'm like, first off, that's a line in the dirt. That's not a path. That people can't, my foot won't fit on that. And he's like, no, just go down there. You'll find like the kids are hanging out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these people. Sure enough, we go down this little path, and there's a whole, it's like Tarzan. You start to look around, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's the gorillas. Like, oh, there's people. There's a house. There's a giant animal in this tree, and we're just living with it. Great. All of a sudden, and so you start looking around, and you're like, man, it smells really funky. Like, what does that smell? And the chief is like, oh, that's rotting fruit. I'm like, that sounds terrible. He's like, yeah, well, it's part of our village. Like, we live here, so that's just part of it. And I'm like, where is here? And so he said, well, every tree on the entire side of this mountain for hundreds of miles is an orange tree. I said, what? He's like, yeah. So we kind of walked, and he said, we've already picked all the oranges right here, but come on. So we walked over this little hill, and sure enough, just orange trees as far as you could see. And this whole village's economy, that orange juice that you drink and all of Latin America drinks, gets picked on the side of this mountain by thousands and thousands of people who just live in naturally occurring orange groves. And so I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like, I've been to an orange grove in the States, and he's like, yeah, it's not like that. He's like, you've never had an orange like you've had one of these oranges. And I'm like, that's a bold statement, sir. Like, have you traveled the world? And he's like, yes. I'm like, okay, touche. He's like, tomorrow morning, my wife's going to make you orange juice. And I'm like, great. Yeah, why wouldn't you make orange juice in an orange grove for breakfast? Like, that just seems like you should do that. And so the next morning I got up, and his mom and his wife were making orange juice. And I'm like watching them, and they're like, squeezing oranges. I'm like, okay, like I've had fresh squeezed orange juice. This will be whatever. And I took a drink, and I went to heaven. Like Paul says, there's a fourth level in heaven. And the only way to get there is through a cup of orange juice from the orange villages, right? And I have asked all of the people that I traveled with that I still be, how did we get to the orange villages? It's like Narnia, apparently. Like, nobody knows how to get there. And when you close the door and you open it, it's like the Matrix. It's not there. And I'm like, how do I get back to the orange villages, right? I would do anything to go back to have orange juice from the orange villages. That's the type of fruit we want to bear in our lives. And that type of fruit only comes from a long time. It only comes from intimacy, right? You must in your life as a disciple have time alone with the Lord. Because here's the truth. Intimacy doesn't happen on display. Intimacy doesn't happen on display. The reason you have that terrifying dream of I'm in junior high all over again, and I show up and all of a sudden I'm naked and the bell just rang to change classes and I'm standing in the hallway. You get terrified in that moment because intimacy is something that's supposed to be protected and happen in private. Intimacy is something that is supposed to be protected and happen in private. And here's what I know. You'll never be comfortable doing in public what you haven't first practiced and cultivated in private. Okay, let me say that again. You will never be comfortable doing in public what you haven't first practiced and cultivated in private. So we gather on the weekends to worship, to really, what Paul says is to encourage one another, to fan into flames. Do not forsake the gathering of believers, right, is what Paul writes. And so when we gather here with other believers, and it's really this moment where we go man, I still love Jesus and you still love Jesus, and I want to fan into flame your passion for the Lord today, and I want to encourage you because I know that Monday through Saturday is just hell for you and your family, and you're just out there on your own, and it feels overwhelming. So when we gather, I want to encourage you that you're not in this alone, right? But if Sunday is your moment with the Lord, the only moment you have with the Lord to learn how to be a worshiper, you'll never worship here. Because you feel exposed. You feel man, this is weird. I don't want to raise my hand because do I like that? Is that me? Is that how I worship? I don't want to kneel. That seems really kind of crazy. And if you've never been in the place of worship alone, then it will always feel weird. Sunday should be an overflow. So Sunday when we gather, it's, hey, your cup is a little bit empty. Let me give you the overflow of what God's been doing in my life this week to help you get through this week. Let me flow into your cup. Let me come alongside. Let me pick up your shoulder. Let me just encourage you and speak life into you. Let me just refresh you so that you can make it. Let me just lend to you. Let me give to you out of the overflow of my heart. But if you haven't spent any time with the Lord, then you walk in here and you're like, just shut up, worship, let's get through this. Great. They're doing this song that I don't even like. Are you kidding me? Chris is introducing the podium and yelling and giving an altar call with an introduction. I went fishing with him yesterday, and he got me saved on the beach. Like, I'm like, how do you put this bait on this hook? And he's like, well, let me tell you about the Lord, and if you're on the hook, let me tell you. I'm like, come on, I'm in. Let me sign that commitment card, brother. You got a plate? I'll give an offering right now. Me and this shrimp just got saved, bro. So when we gather, this should be a place where we are just, man, I'm giving it to you. But if you haven't spent time with the Lord, then you're going to show up and you're just a sucker. You are, because you're in here and you're just like, your soul is literally sucking the life out of this room because it needs the life of Christ to survive. And so you're in here and you just suck. I don't know if I can say that. This is in my church, so there's like a margin of things that I can say that Chris can't say. You do, like you're here and that's just like your soul, whether you know it or not, is doing that to the people around you. Like, how's your week? And you're like, let me tell you about my week. Wait, whoa, stop. I don't want to hear about your week anymore. I changed my mind. Unfollow. Unfriend. Oh, wait, he knows. Oh, we're in person. Oh, no, I don't know what to do. You want a donut? Here's a cookie. See you later. If you don't spend time with the Lord in an intimate place, being refreshed, enjoying the presence of God, being a worshiper alone, you're not going to make it. You're not. Because you're going to show up to church and every little thing's going to get under your skin and drive you crazy. And all of these people that you're made to live in community with and should be a joy to be around and refreshing, they don't. And it's not them, it's you. And so if you come to church every week and you just feel like you're sucking the life out of people around you, maybe you don't know that, just ask somebody, like, do I suck the life out of you? They'll tell you. Maybe. If they just look at you like, no. Or if they use this phrase, bless your heart. Not you. Larry, yes, but you, bless your heart. It's not you. He's not talking about you. Not you. It's you. You will never be comfortable doing in public what you haven't first practiced and cultivated in private. The first soil that you have to live in, breathe in, be planted in is the soil of intimacy. People can tell. The fruit in your life can tell. They'll taste your life in every interaction, and they can tell. They can tell. Being on sabbatical is like the weirdest thing in the world, okay? I woke up one day and I was like, babe, are we still getting paid? Like, this feels really weird. And I was like, our rules are pretty, like we have rules for rest. We're like Pharisees and Sadducees, okay? So just pray for us. Like the Sabbath is made not to be broken. Sabbatical month is made to not be broken. It's not for you, it's really for the rules, but whatever. One of them is like, you don't come to Trinity. We don't see you. I don't want to see you at a worship night. I don't want to see you in kids ministry. I don't want to see you at all. Like, don't come here. And so we have gone to a couple other churches and I go home and I'm like, that was fun. And I'm seeing a counselor as well. Okay, so trying to get the most out of this, right? And she told me I had to create a box, right? So every time I go to a church and I see something and I'm like, I really want to tell them that's wrong. She's like, no, you got to put it in the box. So sometimes I look at my wife and I'm like, and she's like, okay, we'll talk about that in a month. I'm like, okay, great, yeah, remind me to talk about that, right? And yeah, I told my wife this one thing. I said, like, I'm enjoying visiting other churches, but if we don't go to another one the rest of the month, like, I'm okay. And I can only say that statement because every day I spend time with the Lord. Okay, now hear me really clear. I didn't just give you permission not to go to church, okay? Please hear that. In this season of my life, the refreshing and the aloneness with the Lord is what my soul desperately needs. It's not an excuse to not be at church, but church is an overflow of an intimate moment, right? And so if you don't have intimate moments, man, then you had better be at church every time the doors are open, if that's your lifeline that you're trying to live on. But as you mature in your faith and your journey with Jesus, like, you should come to a place where you're like, you know what? Like, you should be able to know, like, my family just needs to be home right now. And you can be home and your soul can be refreshed. Now, if you can't be home and your soul can't be refreshed, then you need to be at church. Okay, so intimate moments with the Lord is the first soil. And if you abandon that soil, hear this, no other soil will be able to help you grow to its fullest capacity. They all build on the first soil of intimacy, okay? The second soil is the soil of serving. David was a servant. If you study David's life, like, he is rooted and he is a servant. He served his father, his brothers, King Saul, Jonathan. He served. Here's the truth about serving. Serving creates humility in us so that God has an avenue to work through us. Serving creates humility in us so that God has an avenue to work through us, right? Serving says, I trust God to promote me, to develop me, to bear fruit. I trust God to do in me what he wants to produce through me. Serving is the way that God gets the weeds out of our soil. Serving is the way that God gets the weeds out of our soil. The weeds of discontentment, of bitterness, of anger, of hurt, of jealousy, of insecurity, of gossip, of fill in the blank. If you want to do some gardening in your soil, then just start serving people. Ooh, Lord, they will push some buttons. Or have a toddler. John 13, right there where Jesus is having this conversation, verses 13 through 17, I'm not going to read it, but Jesus washes the disciples' feet and he says, see, I've done this for you. I've set an example for you that you call me Master and Lord, and yet I've chosen to serve you. If you want to look like Jesus, then you had better be somebody who serves. The third soil is the soil of community. To bear fruit will require that you are planted and rooted in the soil of community. David, in one season of his life, he's running from King Saul. He's running and he's trying to survive, and he finds this place of hiding called the Cave of Adullam. And nobody likes the Cave of Adullam story, but in the Cave of Adullam in 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1, it says this, David left Gath and escaped to the Cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him, like the motley crew, right? Angry people, they're in debt, they're broke. They can't buy you lunch. They're broke. They're in debt. People are wanting to hunt them down. So now you are getting hunted, and all the people that are also getting hunted in your country, we're all now centrally located together. So the people that don't like you, now they don't like me. Now they don't like us. You and me became a we, and now we are in trouble, and now we are a thing. And God planted David in the midst of community so that he would learn to trust others. He planted him there so he would learn how to grow and lead others. He planted him there so he would learn how to encourage and inspire. He planted him there so he would learn how to handle disappointment. So how he would learn to listen to others, how he would learn to honor others. David learned all of that in a cave on the side of a mountain surrounded by 400 people who nobody would have chosen to build a community with. Sometimes the people you need in your life aren't the ones that you would want in your life. But if you're going to bear fruit, you don't always get to choose the thing that you want in order to produce the thing that you need. Community, my father-in-law, Jay, he planted a willow tree in his front yard, and we live in West Texas, and I'm like, Jay, that tree is really too thin to be out in the wind by itself. And so like a couple days later, we come over and like, here's this willow tree in the front yard. And I'm talking like you could have anchored a radio tower with these ropes that he put on this thing. Like there's 5 of them. And then there's like caution flags. I think OSHA drove by and was like, you should put some caution flags on that so somebody doesn't get decapitated when they're running through your yard. And I'm like looking at it. I'm like, wow, Jay, like, man. But man, such a profound truth. Community helps us grow straight as trees. If you don't have community in your life, you'll just bend over and you'll get crooked. You will. And so community in our life as disciples, they operate like guide wires. They keep us going in the right direction. They help us grow straight. They help us grow tall. They protect us from the elements. So when a wind comes that might blow us off course, as Paul wrote to Timothy, he says, hey, like now, you're rooted and established in love so that you won't be shifted, caught off guard by the wind, the cunningness of their teaching. Friends, community keeps us rooted and safe so that we can endure the storms that might cause us to become uprooted. If you don't have community, you'll blow like a tumbleweed. You will. Something will come along and you'll just get uprooted real quick and you'll just blow to the next place and you'll be an eyesore. No, I don't know about that, but the fourth fruit or the fourth soil is the soil of giving. Giving. And you could call this sacrifice if you wanted. And David in his journey to being king, he gladly gives away everything. David gives away rooms in his palace. He gives away the kingship literally to his son. The end of his life, Solomon. Before Solomon, he willingly leaves the kingdom because his son is started a rebellion. David willingly says, I'm going to give the kingdom away. I'm just going to give it away. I am attached to none of this. I'm attached to my God, and he will make my paths secure. I'm not attached to anything, so I'm willing to give it away. He gave Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, the rightful heir. I mean, if you didn't know, Mephibosheth, after Solomon, Jonathan, and his brothers were all slaughtered in battle, Mephibosheth was the rightful heir to the throne that David sat on. And David says, you know what? I could have you killed, right? Most kings would have you killed. You get a seat at my table for the rest of your life. David gives, right? David gives. David had a dream in his life to build the temple of the Lord. He says, why should I dwell in a palace when the Ark of the Covenant dwells in a tent? And God comes to him and says, David, you have too much blood on your hands. You're not going to build a house for me, right? And so David says, you know what I'm going to do then? I'm going to store up all the riches I have for my son to build you a temple. So David gave when he knew that the next generation would be the one that actually experienced the presence of God dwelling among them. David gave financially and sacrificially. He gave to the Lord's temple before it even existed so that the next generation could embrace it. Paul uses this idea, and I'm going to close with this if the worship team wants to come up. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 14 through 19, Paul is writing to the church at Ephesus. He's writing to a church in a town, and they've got all kinds of stuff going on, and Paul writes to them, and he says, for this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and earth derives his name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with the power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Rooted and established in love, planted in the house of the Lord, planted in community so that you can understand who Christ is, requires a planting. He writes this to the church at Colossae in Colossians chapter 2, verse 6. So then, just as you receive Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in him, rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. I want to tell you, Destiny Church, that this is good soil. This is good soil to be planted in. This church, this community, this house of faith, this gathering of people, it's great soil to be planted in. It is, and it's soil that's cultivated the place of intimacy. It's a house that's cultivated the place of serving. It's a house that's cultivated the place of giving. It's the house that's cultivated these soils so that you can grow, right? Intimacy is required. Serving is necessary. Community is essential. Giving, it's a part of the process. This is great soil to be planted in. And the first part of that journey this morning, if you're here, is to surrender your life to Christ. I mean, you can try to bear fruit in your life without Christ, but it won't work. It won't. And you can just turn on the TV and look at any billionaire that's dying today and watching their entire fortune be given away, split up, and nothing to show that has eternal impact, to just see what it looks like to build fruit on your own. It doesn't last. It won't. But if you want to bear fruit that remains, then you need to surrender your life to Christ. And it's going to be the hardest, most costly decision you ever make. It's the most rewarding. It will always be worth it. It will take you places you never dreamed of. It'll take you on adventures you never would have gone on any other way. It is Jesus and only Jesus that can make your life bear fruit and fruit that remains. Let's pray. Father God, I just pray over those in this room who don't know you. Father, I pray that as Chris and Jody and the family here serves them and invest in their life, that they would surrender their life to you, that they would say yes to following you and giving you everything that they need to surrender, Father. I pray for those this morning who are wondering if this is the place that they should be planted. Father, I pray that you would help crack open the hard shell of their story in their heart. God, I pray for a willingness to enter into the hard places. God, I pray that you would give them courage to believe and to be vulnerable, God, to be planted. I pray for a healing of hearts this morning, God. Those who are here just carrying a weightiness and a burden, and they're wondering if, God, if you can still use their life to bear fruit. Father, I pray that just in this moment, God, that you just remind them what David said, that being planted in the house of the Lord will cause us to be old men and women who bear fruit. And Father, I pray for those of us who are wavering. God, I pray that, God, you would just restore to us the joy of our salvation. That you'd remind us of why we said yes to you, God. You'd remind us of who we are without you, Father. I pray that you would remind us of why we chose your local church to be a part of. God, why you have us here at Destiny. God, what you're building in us and through us and around us, God, that it's worth it.